We begin right now with a major development in this impeachment case against President Trump. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, who, as you know, has been so careful throughout this process that for months she was opposing the plurality of her members who wanted impeachment. Well, she is out there making a very clear case. I want to show you right now at the top of our broadcast as she stepped out to the cameras today and made it clear. The Speaker says Congress can impeach President Trump for bribery.
Quid pro quo, bribery. The bribe is to grant or withhold military assistance. That's bribery. It's perfectly wrong. It's bribery. Bribery. And that is in the Constitution attached to the impeachment proceedings.
That's bribery. That's the Speaker of the House making headlines today. Pelosi making it plain that she views this as a potential way to impeach Trump, that an article of impeachment would be based on the accusation that Trump demanded Ukraine investigate the Bidens in exchange for money as a bribe. In this case, it's your money. Remember, that's Donald Trump misappropriating money that taxpayer dollars were supposed to go to this other country. Now, this is new. This is the first time Speaker Pelosi has made the specific bribery case against Donald Trump. She's obviously the top Democrat in power. And several other key Democrats have also recently discussed bribery as the article of impeachment that they may lead with against Donald Trump. So this is all brand new this week. Pelosi, brand new today. That's why it's news tonight. If you happen to watch The Beat, some of this may sound familiar because we have been reporting out the constitutional case here about this for some time. In fact, I wrote in October, on October 20th, about why bribery makes a strong constitutional case for impeachment. Now, at the time, the Democrats had not settled on a core legal rationale, especially in public. But the Constitution's answer, I wrote, was staring them in the face. Donald Trump's actions regarding Ukraine fit one of the few offenses the Constitution specifically lists as impeachable: bribery. We wrote that then. We reported on it here on The Beat. And it is interesting, obviously, to then see now the Congress looking at this as one of the potential articles of impeachment. An increasing number of witnesses, of course, are part of the evidentiary reason for that. In that sense, this is pretty straightforward. You have now more and more people out in public stating the evidence that would support a bribery case, and you have more Democrats getting on board with the bribery argument.
The president broke the law. This is a very strong case of bribery.
President Trump was indeed soliciting a bribe. It's extortion.
If he sought to condition, coerce, extort, or bribe an ally, if this is not impeachable conduct, what is?
So that's how the case is being outlined. What is the evidence for that case? Well, again, with these hearings kicking off, we're learning more and more. It's quite fast the way this is coming in. Let me show you just a couple of highlights. A key witness in the bribery plot here, now in hot water today. Trump's $1 million donor and handpicked ambassador, Mr. Sondland, who I mentioned earlier, is facing evidence about the call that he had with Donald Trump about the Biden investigation. Now, remember, he already spoke to Congress in private and reportedly did not raise, address, or honestly talk about this call. He also originally testified in his private appearance that there was no bribery. Then he pulled something that we call a reverse Mulvaney. He changed his testimony after other witnesses came forward, and he moved over into the bribery camp. Today, the AP reporting that another U.S. official heard that Donald Trump was on that call. This was all in the midst of the Ukraine plotting. I should mention that's an AP article, and NBC, as of this hour, has not reported that story. More on Sondland will be in this show tonight. I have something special to look at a problem with Trump's defense about it. But before Sondland testifies next week, we are also going to hear from a key witness tomorrow. That's the former Ukraine ambassador, Yovanovitch, who testified she was also facing a part of this plot, smeared by Trump and Giuliani, pressured to back up the Trump administration in public, threatened in terms of her career. Democrats basically are going to dig into all of this and why that is part of the plotting. Now, then you think about what happened this week. I can tell you, this is new today, the new numbers we have in, those hearings were seen or heard by over 13 million Americans across all the different news channels, suggesting the story continues to break through. I want to bring in our experts right now. Juanita Tolliver from the Center for American Progress Action Fund, Robert Litt, former general counsel of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and NBC News correspondent Heidi Przybyla in the Congress. Good evening, everyone. Juanita, Speaker Pelosi is known to be a careful strategist, to think first, to huddle with her folks, and then come out. When you see her make that very clear, very aggressive bribery case today, what does it mean to you?
It means that she knows that she has the information needed to see it through. Just like she waited to hold a vote on this, just like she waited to begin proceedings, she knew the conditions, what she needed, and as soon as she got them, she moved. So this is her moving on this. After yesterday, Ambassador Taylor's revelation about what his staffers told him, the fact that you also have another staffer coming out today saying they can corroborate this story means that she feels comfortable in moving her caucus in this direction. And what is interesting here is that it's going to likely yield results. We know that one of those staffers who worked for Ambassador Taylor is being deposed later this week. And so what is going to come from that is additional corroborating information, which is going to drive this forward.
And Juanita, this is a storyline. And the question for any investigation is what's the evidence for the story and how do you tell it? And so thinking about her, again, embracing what could be one of the articles of impeachment, a big deal, bribery, it's right there in the Constitution, and then looking at the way that she is taking on Trump in public, the communication. Take a look at this noticed moment today.
The president has something that is exculpatory. Mr. President, that means you have anything that shows your innocence. Then he should make that known, and that's part of the inquiry.
Juanita.
Look, she knows he's watching. As much as he said he's not. She knows that he's watching this with bated breath, huddling it with his team in the White House every single day, and she is making the case directly to him. Hey, if you've got something, put it up. If not, everything you've done has obstructed this process every step of the way, and I am not backing down. This is Pelosi. Again, she sees her mark, and she's going after it with full force.
Robert, I wonder what you think, given your experience as a government lawyer at the highest levels, of the way the speaker made the case today, that there was something Trump wanted to help him get reelected. He demanded it, as she said, in return for money. And she says that's bribery.
Well, I think there's a very clear mapping of this onto the bribery statute. The bribery statute says it's a crime to solicit anything of value in exchange for the performance of official duties. And in this case, the thing of value was the president's desire to have Ukraine aid him in his reelection efforts. The official act was the withholding of the aid, and the solicitation is what we've seen both in the transcript and in the other testimony that we've had about Trump insisting that there was a linkage between the two. So I think, as you said earlier, it's very easy to fit these facts into the framework of the bribery statute.
Just to be clear, if this were, say, a governor who wouldn't have the type of quasi-immunity that presidents tend to have in our federal system, or at least that's the way DOJ has treated it, would a governor be in trouble here? Could a governor go to jail for something like this?
Absolutely. A governor, a county official, any kind of government official who uses his or her power to take or withhold actions in exchange for something of value to them.
Heidi, out on the Hill, a lot of debate. I want to show a little bit of the highlights back and forth. Take a look.
These liberals here in Washington continue to try to throw baseless allegations and accusations at the president.
The bribe is to grant or withhold military assistance in return for a public statement of a fake investigation into the elections.
It's a disgrace. I think people saw yesterday they don't have anything. There are no impeachable offenses.
Bribery, and that is in the Constitution attached to the impeachment proceedings.
Heidi.
Look, for some time now, Speaker Pelosi has known that she has firsthand fact witnesses, starting with the acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, who acknowledged that the aid was being withheld for political investigations that the president wanted. So they felt that they have the goods for some time. Now, whether the actual article of impeachment is going to read or be labeled writ large bribery, we don't know for sure right now, but what we do know is that they're narrowing the messaging, that they feel that the message that needs to be communicated to the public in order for this to be understandable is to use words like bribery instead of, quite frankly, the Latin phrases we've been using, quid pro quo, because you don't have to speak Latin to speak the language of bribery. It is the president himself, his words, that they believe fit into that bribery framework. And you saw that laid out by the Democratic counsel in the hearing with Ambassador Taylor. Let me give you a few examples of how the president was speaking the language of bribery in their view. He used words, according to Sondland, like stalemate. If the investigations were not performed, they'd be at a stalemate. That Sondland said that he is a businessman and that Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, had to, quote, pay up before the president, Trump, cut the check. That Zelensky had to go to a microphone and do it himself. That Giuliani wanted the words Burisma in there and that they wanted Zelensky in a box. These are all the instances and the language of bribery that the Democrats want us all to start using that language instead of this more obscure quid pro quo language that is not just language to a lot of people.
I think you really went through, and that was very interesting reporting there. You're talking about the way that the hearing was trying to pin down what each of those things meant if there was a plot. I would just say, as reminding viewers, this is more than just language. We think a lot in politics and campaigns about framing and branding and yada, yada. We're talking, though, about what is the reason to remove a sitting president, right? If Congress does that, and the reasons the Constitution gives, and I'm going to bring in a member of Congress to get into this, is bribery, treason, or a high crime. The first two were very much defined at the time. The third is a catch-all. All of you, please stay with me. Let's turn to a member of the Intelligence Committee, Texas Congressman Joaquin Castro. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Good to be with you.
Great to have you. You are on this key committee. And my first question for you, Congressman, is why is the Speaker and the chairman of your committee making this case explicitly about bribery right now? And do you think that could be one of the articles of impeachment?
Yeah, it could very well be. And I think the reason that Speaker Pelosi mentioned bribery, and it's likely that there could be other things as well in the articles of impeachment, is because President Trump was trying to take out a political rival. The way he tried to do it was by withholding military aid in exchange for a favor. As he said, he asked directly for a favor. That favor was to investigate a political rival, Joe Biden and his son, Hunter Biden, and the company that Hunter Biden had done work for, Burisma.
And let me ask you a short question and then a longer follow-up. The short question is, do you think that Donald Trump obstructed justice in the Mueller probe?
I do, actually.
I know you do, right? And so let me ask you it this way, because we've talked about that, and you've been clear on that. How do you have a set of articles of impeachment against the president that does not include that in addition to Ukraine if you and others are on the record saying that that was that bad? In other words, even if Speaker Pelosi and others think that the messaging might be better to be more focused, do you have an obligation as someone who said that it's that bad under the Constitution, under your oath, to make sure that that's included?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. And, we're not at the part, obviously, where we've drawn up the articles of impeachment yet. And that's something that the Judiciary Committee will probably take up first before the whole body takes it up. But yeah, I thought that there was obstruction of justice in the Mueller probe. So it's a discussion that we'll have to have.
Stay with me. Robert, I'm curious what you think of what the congressman just said. You are the kind of person who would often, frankly, be an expert witness at one of these hearings as a former DNI counsel. The congressman says that there's a reason to include all of that. I wonder what you think.
Well, I think that Mueller's report laid out a very strong case that the president did obstruct justice. I think whether or not to include that in the articles of impeachment is a political calculation rather than a legal one. It's a question of what Speaker Pelosi and the Judiciary Committee think is the most effective articles of impeachment to send to the Senate for trial. I do want to make one additional point on the bribery, if I can, and that is that it's important to understand that the bribe doesn't have to be paid. You heard Representative Jordan and others yesterday making a big point about the fact that the aid was eventually released, the meeting took place, but the bribery statute makes it a crime to solicit a bribe, even if the bribe isn't actually paid, and that's a point that should be emphasized all the time.
It's such an important point you make. Again, it's not prejudging what all the evidence will show, but you're defining the terms, which is how a lot of court cases work, and certainly how an impeachment process is going to work. We heard a lot about people saying, well, if he didn't pull off his whole plot, does that make him innocent? As you say, the answer is obviously no. You and I were discussing earlier whether governors would go to jail for something like this. Governor Blagojevich is incarcerated right now for trying to sell the vacant Senate seat in Illinois, where he was governor and he had that power, and Barack Obama vacated his seat to become president. As everyone knows, Congressman, that seat ultimately was not effectively sold because the investigation stopped Blagojevich from doing it.
Yeah, no, that's right. And that's a great parallel. That seat was never actually sold to anyone, and yet the governor ended up in jail. And that's the point that I was making yesterday in the hearing. For example, with attempted robbery, you would still be charged. Attempted murder, you'd still be charged. Here, with bribery, it doesn't matter whether actually there was an acceptance or not. The president made that offer or tried, then he's guilty, and it's a crime.
Wow. Congressman, before we lose you, what do you think is the next most important thing we might learn or that you want to get at in these coming hearings?
I think that's pretty clear. It's the interview with Ambassador Sondland and what he says about that conversation that he reportedly had with Donald Trump that was overheard in that restaurant. Remember, there's a witness who says, I overheard a conversation that Donald Trump was inquiring about the Burisma and Biden investigations. It was a conversation between the president and Ambassador Sondland. The committee is going to ask Ambassador Sondland very directly what happened in that conversation.
I got you. And that's going to be a big answer I think people are going to be waiting to hear. What I'm going to do is thank the congressman and Councilor Litt and Juanita. I want to thank each of you. Heidi, hang with me for one more moment. I want to play one more piece of business. So thanks to everybody. Take a listen to one of the Republican defenses today.
The only person I saw yesterday doing the job that they were elected to do was the President of the United States. The question is, nothing is there as impeachable, and we should not be putting our country through this. We're less than a year away from an election.
I showed the top Democrat, Heidi. There's the top Republican in the House. I wonder if you could give us your reporting on that part of the defense that we're hearing.
Well, the defense is really at this point that you can't prove it, right? Because there's nobody who was sitting in a room with Trump when he said, let's do a quid pro quo. However, you're seeing all of these fact witnesses now who are going to come forward, who were there, including the individuals who heard the president themselves on the phone pushing for investigation. So what this is really a preemptive attempt to try and form the narrative early that none of these guys have any credibility because it was all hearsay. Well, this Sondland conversation, which has now been exposed, actually undercuts all of that, because that is the whole point, is that the ambassador was cut out, that it was hearsay because he was being pushed aside. Maria Ivanovich was being pushed aside. And now we have proof that the president was conducting all of this personally on an unsecured phone call in Kiev, which is one of the most notorious places for our lines to be tapped for surveillance by the Russians.
You lay it out. It's a lot there. Heidi Prisbilla, wanted to get that last piece from you with the Republican leader. Thanks for your reporting tonight.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.